Hello, I am going to do the Jack Black Stump Professor team questions. Thank you, Team Jack Black. Let's see. The first question is, if the Cynefin Framework is designed to help leaders diagnose the context they're in before acting, how do we prevent overconfidence? So good in that diagnosis, especially when different people with the same or within the same organization might perceive being in a different situation or a different domains. Okay, or the same situation but different domains. That is the purpose of Cynefin, actually, just to not jump to the end, but because I really want to address this idea of overconfidence as well. But when we talk about what Cynefin is doing, it's really asking us about the messiness of being human and the messiness of and randomness of what's happening around us and how do you make sense of that. The Cynefin framework is acknowledging that you don't know the answer, that you have to consult with experts, or you have to get a task force together, or you have to move into maybe more of a hindsight and diagnosing the issues and the problem and even defining the problem that takes a lot more time. So when I hear over the idea of overconfidence, overconfidence is someone who um, is actually not confident and is asserting authority or is dismissive to different ideas, either to assert their point of view as the dominant position, or they're dismissive of other ideas because they're worried about time or expenses or whatever the pressures are that are circulating around that person's experience. Overconfidence is usually a type of arrogance that bubbles up because they have a certainty. They're thinking of everything in the terms of not complexity, not complicated. They want to live in clear, best, pr- and they have the known answer, and that's only one part of the domain, and it is not true leadership when someone wants to live down in this managerial style uh, of certainty. And God, wouldn't it be nice if everything was certain and clear? But that's why I really like teaching the Cynefin framework, because life is messy. So when we talk about uh, what's happening with leadership, and if someone has a different point of view, if someone is diagnosing things different, you want to pull that dialogue into that complex area and begin you can have a clear, structured approach to how you want to get voices in and define the problem. Um, so you can kind of play around with the domains and have a way to approach it. But that takes time and resources. Maybe if you're dealing with a disorder moment that needs a reaction, uh, you might have to, because complex really sometimes, depending on the situation, especially in an emergency situation or a situation that's urgent, you might have to just make a decision, and someone disagrees, like, we're going to call the expert in on this, and someone says, no, we don't have to. Here's what the book says. When this happens, we're supposed to do that. And you're like, okay, well, we're going to then, if the book says, if the checklist says this is the next thing to do, we definitely want to do that. So you're going to move into the clear domain. And then you say, however, we want someone on the team to go do a consultation. We want to get a little bit of investigation just in case there's something we're not understanding or diagnosing correctly. So, knowing as a leader of a team or a group, how to manage a disagreement is to acknowledge that we have to make a decision now, that this is where we're going. If I can spare someone, I want you to check out this other idea that someone had. But then at some point, the buck stops with someone, and you've got to move into an action mode in urgent situations. Uh, Unfortunately, sometimes life is on the line, or some type of consequence is facing the decision. And this is what you're trying to do in this program. You're really trying to learn how to stabilize yourself and get yourself in a place where you're not overconfident, but you know how to self-regulate and pull and not pull towards doubt, right? You want confidence, but not overconfidence. Overconfidence is dismissive, it's not listening, it's not curious. Confidence is knowing how to self-regulate. It's knowing it's knowing to be curious and to give time. And even if you don't have time, you have a way to acknowledge that there might be a disagreement in the group. And then over time, you build trust. And those, as Brene Brown calls it, those little marble moments, those little teeny tiny actions, even that Covey talks about, that over time build trust. You're like, I had to make a decision. It might not be the right one, but this is what we're doing today. We're going to deal with the consequences, but we also should deal with a post-mortem discussion afterwards. Okay, that's how I'm coming at that one. Number two, how does relying on digital communication fundamentally change workplace trust? So we all are relying on digital communication. I mean, we live in that it's very rare to be in an organization that isn't using digital communication to some level. Maybe an over reliance. You already said we already talked about overconfidence. So now I'm feeling like an over reliance on digital communication, meaning most people are remote. Um, or there's not a lot of in-person interactions or time. So this is a actually really important thing that you're asking. And I think it goes back to our module on time and the way we slice time up in our workplace day, but how we're experiencing time. And digital communication is always moving towards an agitated state. There's always something to do. There's always an email. There's a Teams or whatever the software you're using. There's might be some chat going on that you have to keep an eye on and reply to. And digital communication has the demand of productivity, efficiency. It is the nonverbal kind of contextual channel that if we're communicating digitally, there's an urgency and agitation that comes from just communicating digitally. Uh, you know this because if even in your own life, if someone sent you a text message and maybe you didn't reply right away, maybe you waited a few hours, maybe you waited a day, and all of a sudden it became a point of conflict that you didn't reply, or you sent a message and didn't get a reply. You are seeing that the nonverbal channel, uh, the digital communication kind of already includes the messaging of I need of speed. Speed in and quickness are the expectation of digital communication. And then we can even talk about our Zoom meetings and coming into spaces like this, that there is something about this because of the way it frames me here, right? So when I'm framed in here, face on, if you were in the workplace or talking to people in the workplace, you wouldn't sit like this with someone's face this blown up. I'm in a medium shot, but some people are on laptops. Some people are way up here. Some people are way down here, right? There's all this stuff happening and there's no consistency. But the truth is, we don't usually sit face to face. And that's usually in nonverbal communication, this kind of face-to-face encounter, if you were in person, is very adversarial, confrontational in its style. It's naturally has a confrontation piece to it. This is part of the pushback and the abruptness of going from workplace to Zoom meeting calls all day long, of having face and face interactions, was a level of exhaustion that we were not completely prepared for. um, as a society. Definitely, there's individuals who've learned how to manage it because they already had the natural remote working environment. But a societal shift towards that, uh, it really discounted how we use distance, how we use eye contact, power dynamics, especially all the boxes. In the beginning, all the boxes would show up. Maybe you'd have like the main speaker and the gallery mode for who's not speaking, but most of us, or some, I don't know how you did it, but I always did it so it was I could see all the boxes in the gallery mode. And that's what I ask when you submit your team meetings for my class: gallery mode, gallery mode, gallery mode. Uh, that created this weird visual equity thing of this kind of solidarity of holding space, which does not exist in person. In person, architecture environments are designed to make sure you know your place in that organization. So environmental design kind of got thrown out the window, and we couldn't use those cues. If you jumped into a meeting, who's the leader of the meeting? Who's the supervisor? Who's the manager? Who's the administrative assistant? Where if you think about a conference room or the way your workplaces in person are designed, people are usually designated spaces based on their position in the organization, and we lost all that. So the uncertainty changes trust. The lack of grounding, is grounding the right word? Well, it took more work, to sense making work, to understand relationships when we are in digital formats. And of course, I'm talking about video, but we have all the messaging that comes across chats and emails that lack the nuance of nonverbal gestures, tone, all these other channels, these channel rich of a transactional communication experience being in person. We know when we get to just the written word, there's a lot of miscommunications. There's all these things you got to worry about your tone. I mean, I think the rise of things like Grammarly or other softwares you can install that check your tone before you send it is because this has been such a problem that it eroded workplace trust. I mean, I could spend a whole class just on this one question. It's a great question and it's worth asking. So as we go into hybrid spaces, or we're coming back, you might think about your own spaces that you have to. As some jobs come back into, obviously there were some jobs that were always in person. We really learned who were our uh, frontline workers and who were the essential workers that were keeping our society going, from grocery stores to other people who are in service industry. We saw how important their value is. But for people who were in more office jobs that could adapt to the COVID change to remote, as things come back and we are integrating again, you can think about how can you use digital communication to actually enhance and build trust, uh, or how was it, or how can in person really really make a huge difference. I'm already thinking of other ways I could answer this question. There's a lot here. Good job, every team Jack Black. Okay, how can you use the safe to fail probe when a problem within an organization is an emotional and urgent team conflict. Conflict? Team conflict? Oh my gosh. Asking a question. Oh my God, these questions were so good. Uh, so safe to fail. I did take some notes. I've got my note page here. I did take some notes on this one because I wanted to think about it. And this question is actually like ever since you asked it weeks ago. I know this is a little bit later than when you asked it. It's stuck in my head a little bit. I thought it was really kind of had a bit of a puzzle to it. So what I want to say when we talk about safe fail protocols, and a lot of different organizations use safe fail protocols, from military operations to other situations that are to academics. I don't know. It gets applied a lot, and now that you have hear it, you might start hearing it around. I think a lot of people they want to implement their solution, and they implement solutions like it's a silver bullet, like it is the answer to this. We had this come up, this was the problem, overconfidence. This is how we're going to solve it. And safe fail is asking you to experiment a little bit more, to not think of your answer as a clear answer. And so that's why a safe fail is to implement a, a step. So if you have a marketing idea for something going on or some type of outreach you need to do, and you're not sure your plan is going to work, you chunk it up into little pieces and you try things in little bites. And then those little bites, you build more confidence, you see how what was working and not working, and then you take the next bite. But if there's a fail, you're not failing the whole idea, you're just failing a small piece of the idea. And when we talk about um the second part of this question, when we're talking about something that has a lot of emotion tied up into it, when it's has an urgency, which I just talked about, when in in a and there's a conflict. So conflict, I feel like all these questions really build on each other. That what we want to understand is there is a relational element to our workplaces. There is this you have to acknowledge, even if you want to just do your job, stay in your lane and get your job done, check, I'm out. There is a relational element, and part of relationships, conflict is inevitable. So if you are, and we'll talk about this in my conflict class, and some of you have been in my conflict class. I'm looking at your team. Yeah, quite a few of you have already taken the conflict class, that you already know that how to step away and how to step in. And this is great for safe fail too, to keep things on a small scale and be aware of tone and how you debrief, how you are defining things. If someone's defining something different, be curious and jump into that. Often organizations have narratives, right? There's all these narratives that are meta narratives of the organization, the mission statement, the purpose, why we're here. And then the people within that organization are like bees in the hive that uh, are translating and articulating the organizational narrative in their own perspectives. And then if you, depending on your organization, you might get competing narratives. Someone else says this one group, you might have a whole group that says we need to go in this direction, and another group saying you might want to go in this direction. And when you have competing narratives, what we're talking about is that you are looking at the story, the characters, the plot, the goal. When a competing narrative is the way someone the tells the problem and the language they're using to define things and defining the path to the solution. And they've got this whole story about all the context and the minutia of everything that happened, and then they come, this is what we have to do. And a competing narrative says, no, no, we didn't start over here, we started way over here. And they have their minutia and moments and context, and they're building all their characters and plot, and that's why we need to go here. uh, so when you have competing narratives, this is where your safe fail probe might actually come in handy as a technique. Saying, okay, well, I'm not going to choose your solution and I'm not going to choose your solution. And I'm not sure. I think there are some things we need to tie in. You need to find the places where the competing narratives tie in and find those threads of common ground. And you need to create a team narrative to define what's happening. That's called a task force. That's complex. And you have to say, actually, I don't think the solutions are as obvious as that. That now we're gonna take a little bit of this and a little bit of that, not a compromise, but I want to try something to see how it pulls us in this direction. And we want to try something to pull it, or choose a completely third option, but you want it to make it a really tiny, small bite, and then get into that let like that experiment mode of pulling through. uh, what are the outcomes? How are we going about this? And not be so focused on forcing something into your idea from the overconfidence one. You don't want to force it into there. All right. I hope that helped a little bit. These questions were really great. And I can't wait to hear if you have a chance to listen to this and respond. Talk to everybody later. Bye bye.